Hey guys, Kyle here, Gnarly Knives, and I want to do something a little bit different today. I was sharpening one of my knives earlier when I got out of work, and it got me to thinking, if the world had ended today or tomorrow, and I could only take one pocket knife with me, which one would I take? And I thought about that a lot while I was sharpening, and I grabbed a few different knives. I have 6 knives here that, you know what, any one of them would be great. I would feel pretty happy if it was the end of the world and I could only take one of these pocket knives. Now, this is not excluding fixed blades, or this is excluding fixed blades, sorry, because, you know what, given the choice, I would much rather have a fixed blade and a, zombie apocalypse, the world ends, natural disaster, whatever. But I would definitely like to have a pocket knife with me. And if for whatever reason I only could take one of them is one of these here shown. Now, each of these are all great blades, and if you have one of these and the world ends or whatever, shit hits the fan, and you're stuck with this knife or one of these knives, I think you'll be pretty well off. I would be happy to be stuck with any one of these knives, but there is one in particular out of all of them, and you might be surprised because you know what? It's not my absolute favorite folding knife. It's definitely up there. I'd say top 5. Definitely top 5, possibly even top 3, but that's a whole other video there on my favorite knives. But the first knife here was actually the knife that really got me into fixed folding knives, other than just carrying them. But when I started really thinking more and more about them, but right here is the Ontario Rat 1. Now this is the AUS 8 version, and yeah, you can definitely see if you know these blades, this thing has been sharpened so many times that the blade is worn down very thin. But honestly, it is such a good knife. It's a very robust knife. You know, you have the full steel liners, solid handles. I mean, it's a very good knife, a very comfortable knife, and will lend itself very useful. Personally, if I was stuck with this, I would be happy. I would prefer the D2 model, but AUS 8 is not a bad steel, despite what a lot of people say. I personally do like it a lot. One benefit you would get with the AUS 8 over the D2 is you would get better stainlessness with it, so you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining it quite as much. So depending on where you are in the world when the world ends, especially if you're near a lot of water or the ocean, if you're out at sea, I'd probably take the AUS 8 one solely for the stainlessness there. It is a really good knife, and I really do love this knife a lot, but unfortunately, given some of the other options, I would not actually go with this one, just because I have others to go from. Another really good option, definitely a step up in price, but a step up in steel quality and still sticking with the stainlessness, is the Benchmade 560, the Freak, the larger one, not the Mini. I don't have the Mini. But this is a really good steel. It is S30V, though it can be a little chippy. I have 4 knives with S30V. I have only experienced chipping one time with one knife. It actually was this one, but it was a very minor chip, and it sharpened out very easily. I wasn't spending a lot of time. A lot of people make S30V out that it's, oh my god, S30V, it's, it's going to chip and the blade's ruined, just throw it in the trash. Not true at all. It is a great steel, but this lends itself very useful because it's a very light knife. If you think in the world's ending, you have to leave your home, you're carrying a lot of stuff with you. Having a pretty light knife definitely would lend itself useful in that sense. But weight isn't necessarily playing an issue with me in this, in the way I'm thinking of which knife I would want to carry. Though this is a great knife, it is extremely comfortable. If you do have any more interest in this knife, please see the 560 Freak review that I did. You just scroll down through the videos and you'll find it. But it is a very good knife. It's a very tough knife. You do have that blade coating. Not that S30V really have to worry about rusting too much, but doesn't mean it won't rust, so it just gives you that extra little benefit there. And, yeah, I guess if you're trying to be stealthy and, whatever, the blade won't reflect. But I just find it to be a very useful knife. One thing that is really good about it, it is very easy to open and close one-handed very quickly. and it is extremely comfortable. It does fit the hand well, so if you are doing tasks or cutting for a long period of time, out of all these knives, this one probably would be the most comfortable, but still, it's just not quite what I think I would want to go for, just given some of these other options. Though it is an amazing knife, I do recommend this knife to everyone, as I would the Ontario Rat 1. Very good knife, love it a lot, and also do have a good amount of blade length. All of these knives here are going to be at least 3 inches in blade length. You know, if the world ends, don't really have to worry about legalities when it comes to blade lengths. So, one thing I wanted to go for were knives a little bit longer blade length. Great knife. Another one here, I really do like this one a lot. I do recommend, in general, it is a really good hard use knife. Out of all of these knives here, it is probably one of the tougher of them. But it's the Code 4 by Cold Steel. This is the drop point model. They do have a few other ones. They have a spear point and a Tanto. This, I find, personally, I have Tantos. I have clips and swedges and spear point blades. I think the clip here with the swedge, I think, is probably the most well-rounded out of them. Unless you're thinking maybe more for self-defense, I suppose the Tanto would probably be better. But, if I have a fixed blade, I'm not a knife fighting expert by any means, but if I were to get into a knife fight, I'd rather be using a fixed blade, which I'd probably already have on me. So these knives would probably stay in my pocket anyway. Though, if I got stuck having to defend myself with one of these knives, I'd feel pretty alright with that as well. You do also have the S35VN, so it's a little slight upgrade in the sense of toughness with the S30V, so it's less likely to chip. You're more apt to get rolls with it. Similar with the stainlessness. It is a really good steel, and honestly, for the price of the knife, you can get for about $80. I mean, you really can't beat that if you're looking for something. If you got stuck in the end of the world with this knife, I would be pretty happy. But like I said with the others, we have some other options here, and there are some others I think would be better suited for me. Though this is a really good knife, and like I said, it is very tough. You do have that triad lock. Cold Steel is infamous for. So basically turning this into almost a folding fixed blade. And it does have a fairly thick tip, so you don't have to worry about it snapping off. You have to do a little bit of prying. Though, of course, I never recommend it, but, it's the end of the world. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, and it could make that difference right there, being able to use your knife as a more multi-purpose tool than just for cutting. Would definitely recommend a lot. It does also have that hollow grind, so this is a pretty slicey knife, even though it is very thick when you look at the top of the spine. But the Cold Steel does a really good job with that hollow grind. So, it would be well-rounded, just as the other two were flat grinds. The Benchmade 560, kind of in the middle there, is a high saber grind, but still very, very slicey and a little more robust in that sense there. Definitely would keep going down the list here, but any of these knives would be a great way to go. Next one here, I would say, would definitely be a good option is your Cold Steel Broken Skull. You do have the longest blade length out of all of these, and you do have a really good steel, this being the CTSX HP. So it is basically a stainless version of D2 with a much higher edge retention and still pretty tough. At one of these points, I will do a video talking about different steels and their categories, at least the way that I see them. I'm not a metallurgist or an expert, but, I have a lot of experience with, sharpening, with using different knives with different steels, and CTSX HP I've actually really grown very fond of. You do again have your back lock, the triad lock that we have with the Code 4. This does lend itself to be very strong, probably not quite as tough though as overall as some of the other knives. Though it does have G10 handles, and G10 is a tough handle material, but it is linerless, so it's just the G10, which honestly is just fine for 99% of things. But there's another knife here we're going to look at that has G10 handles, but also has the stainless steel liners, which just add a little extra beef to it. This one here would definitely be extremely useful in multitude of tasks, but especially having that longer blade length. We're looking at just about 4 inches, and that gives you a lot of potential, especially, one thing you got to consider, that's why all of these knives, with the exception of the AUSA on the Rat 1, are higher end steels, because, I do my own sharpening, and I would be carrying stones. I wouldn't be taking all my stones with me if I had to leave, but I would be taking some stones, and every stone that I have sharpened every one of these knives, and I know I can get a good edge on them with them. But for someone, if you're not going to really have the ability to sharpen that often, or or maybe if you're, say it happens and you are unable to grab any sharpening equipment, something that'll hold its edge a good while, a good long time, until you can sharpen or have someone sharpen it, is definitely a good thing to consider, because we never know what will happen. But it is a really good knife. It is very comfortable. The only downside, I would say, is just because it is very long. You probably be carrying a lot of stuff, and though it doesn't take up much space width-wise, it is actually a pretty thin knife. But depending on your pockets, you can bottom this out in your pockets. So that might be something to consider. The clip on it is very strong, so I'm not really too worried about it ripping out of my pocket. But it is definitely something to think about. The handle is pretty comfortable, even despite how thin it is, but there's enough space on it that you can stretch your hand out and hold it and use it for a good long time. I would really like this. What am I trying to say? I would really recommend this knife as well if, say, this is the only one you wound up with. But despite some of the other options we have here, I will be putting this off to the side. But do expect a review coming down the line, probably the next couple of weeks, because I really, really love this knife, and I really have basically nothing but good things to say. Maybe a couple small little things, but overall, this is a great knife that you can get for under $100. And CTSX HP is a really good steel, but now, from what I understand, they're actually making these in S35 VN. I think they've put CTSX HP to the wayside with cold steel. Now they're going S35 VN. For example, the Code 4 is S35 VN. Previous model to this, the Code 4 was made in CTSX HP. So that's why, actually, when I found out that they were making the switch, I wanted to grab this right away, because I wanted to have cold steel CTSX HP blade. But I guess that's also for another video. But, there are a lot of things to consider. You got to think of the tasks that you're going to be doing. There's a potential for self-defense or anything, but, you feel you're going to be using, for food cutting tasks. Obviously, maybe, some carving, you're trying to make a fire. There's the potential that you're going to come up across, man-made tougher materials that, to a knife of a lesser steel, you're going to wear out quickly. I'm talking cutting things, cutting through zip ties, cutting through heavy rope, anything like that. I'm not really a big serrated knife person, so that's why, I don't know, I have probably 40 some odd pocket knives. 2 of them, I think, have serrated portions on them. With the exception of, I do have a multi-tool that has a serrated blade on it, but that's a whole other thing. There are so many different things you can find yourself coming up against, and that's why I think the next knife that we're going to look at, we're getting close. This isn't the knife, but we're getting pretty close now. Because this one here is definitely in my top 3 favorite folding knives. Honestly, it might even be my absolute #1 favorite. That's why I know some people watching this video that know me, or just have seen some other videos of me talk about this knife, might be a little surprised. But the Paramilitary 2 by Spyderco, honestly, it doesn't matter the version. The base version is S30V, which is a great steel, good to go. Yeah, the S110V version would be a great option. They have so many other versions. They do a lot of sprint runs, but what the average person is going to probably come across is your S30V version. I mean, this here, you do get a lot of great things with it. This is the example I was saying. So you have the G10 handles with your stainless steel liners, and then the compression lock, which is a very strong lock. Maybe not quite as strong as your Triad lock, but you do get a great amount of lockup with this blade, and I really never worry about this thing closing on me depending what I might be doing with it. And it is a pretty beefy knife, but they do grind it very well, so it does lend itself really good for cutting and slicing. And then you do give you a lot of protection as well. I mean, you have the good finger guard. This knife locks right up into your hand, but then they also give you a good choil, so if you need to choke up on the blade, if you're doing some finer tasks, this is a really great option. And this is why this is the second one. If I had to pick only one knife, but I didn't have the last option, this would definitely be the one that I would pick for anything, even if I was, stuck out in the woods and I didn't have a folding knife with me, or if I didn't have a pocket knife, fixed blade with me, this would be a folding knife I would love to have if I was stuck in a situation where trying to make it out alive is of utmost importance. Never mind the fact that it is just a lot of fun to play with, so, I mean, that's actually something to consider. I mean, you figure you're going to be in a high-stress situation, and the ability to just kind of have something to fidget with, help relieve a little bit of anxiety. But you do have great steel, great edge retention, and it is a stainless steel, so you really do not have to worry about your rusting as much as you would some of the other knives that you could carry. Some of your more semi-stainless, say your D2s, or even, a lot of fixed blades are carbon steel still, so, I mean, if you're worrying about your fixed blade, it's carbon steel, having one knife you don't really have to worry about. So if you are doing some stuff that, be more apt to get the knife wet or exposed to more, I don't know, caustic things, if you will, things that would encourage rust, you could bust out your stainless steel blade and use that in place. And I really can't say enough about this knife here, but I've already done a video on it. I just love talking about it. But this would really be a great way to go, and honestly, it falls in line with a couple of the other knives that are here price-wise, because it goes for around 120 to 130. I mean, the Benchmade Freak goes for 120, and then your Broken Skull and Code 4 are both in the $80 to $100 range. Just depends where you find it. The cheapest option here would definitely be the Rat 1 by Ontario. The AUS 8 model goes for about $27 to $30. I usually see it in that range. If you go for the D2 one, you're looking in the $40 to $45 range. So as a budget option, it would not be a bad way to go at all. But finally, coming to the knife. This is I can bring one pocket knife with me. This is the one. It's the Endura 4 by Spyderco, but not just the regular Endura 4. This is the ZDP 189 version. Alright, so I know we were talking on and on and on about stainlessness. This is a carbon blade. It can rust. I've gotten bits of rust on it, but I'm also pretty careful with it, and it would be something that I would definitely have to put a little more mindfulness in. But for the potential that I get with this knife overall, to me, it's absolutely worth it, and it's just a minor downside to all the plus sides, at least for me, in my opinion. If you do like this blade, this model, you know what, honestly, the VG10 version would be a great way to go. I mean, yes, you're going to sacrifice some edge retention, but you're also going to be increasing your stainlessness. One thing I think that just set this apart for me from the two other backlock or triad locks is that you do have the ability to close this one-handed. Now, yeah, I guess it's not really that big of a deal, but for me, I always try to think of the worst case scenario, and I don't know, if for whatever reason I had to get the blade, put it away quick. I mean, nothing comes to mind, but I don't know, I feel like knowing me, something would happen, and but it just gives that ability that, it gets really quick, pull it out, cut what you need, throw it back in your pocket without having to worry about it. Not quite as long as your Broken Skull, but, I mean, we're definitely, getting close to the 4 inches. The blade overall, I think, is 3 5/8 inches, so I mean it's over 3.5 inches. It's the longest out of these other blades, minus the Broken Skull by Cold Steel. But you do have superior edge retention with this, so if you are stuck in a situation where you won't be able to sharpen right away, though it's not the easiest steel to sharpen, but I don't know, I find once you get a good edge on it, it's really easy to maintain, especially with the strop, as would be the other ones. But this does not take me that long to sharpen. Once I put the bevel on it that I like, it definitely increased the slice capabilities with it. But I just use, I have a little pocket 10,000 grit stone, and minus a chip or a roll, or like a large chip or a roll, I can tune it up in 2 or 3 minutes from dull to shaving sharp. ZDP 189. I definitely will do a video about more the philosophy, or my philosophies with sharpening and steels, because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of stuff that I prescribed to, I thought was, the word of God, if you will. And I just find a lot of it to just be not true. Or at least in my experiences, I've just found not to be the way some other people, I'm not going to mention names, would say about certain steels. But as someone who has sharpened and used a multitude of these steels, I think it's lent myself enough to say that, yes, okay, I'm not an expert, but I definitely have the experience and usage and knowledge to back up what I feel. And it's not just, because I heard this channel say this or that channel say that. Even channels that I love, I do not agree with every single thing that they say, nor do I think that would be a good thing. I don't think you should agree with every single thing I say about knives. Just take the information for what it is and put it to practice, put it to use, and let me know. I want to know your thoughts and opinions on it. But this also, though, it is a backlock, so yeah, I know, boring backlock, but I have fallen back in love with backlocks. And this is still a pretty tough, robust knife. It is the FRN handles, which is basically just a higher grade plastic, but it does have the steel liners in it, and this is a very tough knife. And you still get a fairly thick tip, relatively speaking, compared to the Paramilitary 2, which you know how much I love. But one thing that just makes me a little nervous with the Paramilitary 2 is it does have a pretty thin tip, despite how thick it is. It's probably the thickest next to the Code 4 when it comes to blade stock, but it's definitely one of the thinner tips. Actually, probably the thinnest tip out of all of these. And that's just something that just makes me a little nervous when it comes to that, because you don't know what you're going to be up against, and there is some potential to snap a tip off. And you know what, I've snapped tips off blades before. They're not fun, and I know it's going to sound a little counterintuitive. I've actually snapped the tip off of this before, dropped it, it just slipped out of my hands and fell tip down onto a concrete tile, and just boom, just snapped the tip right off. I had a flat tip, but it wasn't too bad having to put a new tip on it. But I mean, that is something to consider too. It is a very hard knife, compared to these here. I mean, it is on the Rockwell scale of 64. So I mean, that's getting up there. It's not the hardest knife in the world, or the hardest steel, but I mean, that is getting way up there. But that's one of the things that really helps with the edge retention, and it's something I weighed the pros and cons with, and I really find that this knife and this steel, for me, if I could have one pocket knife, is the pocket knife that I would carry. And that's just for right now, as of October of 2019, when this video is out. I mean, 6 months, a year from now, I could think of it different. Maybe I'll get a new knife, or maybe, from just putting a lot of reflection and thought into some of my other blades and through a lot more usage with them, maybe I'll change my mind. But these are all knives that I have used significantly. I have carried these knives, some of them for a very long time. I mean, the Paramilitary 2 and the Endura 4 are in my pocket, I would say 80% of the time. The Rat 1 I carried for a year straight. This was the only knife I carried. The 560 Freak by Benchmade, I carried this for 6 months every single day at work, putting it through a hell of a lot of tasks, and putting it through stuff that, you probably really shouldn't use knives for, but that's why this knife wound up in this video of what knife I would want to carry if I could only take one pocket knife, because I know that what this thing is capable of. And then too, the last month I worked at my previous job, I I naturally put this through a bunch of work, but then I don't know, I guess unnaturally, I found tough things to use this with: scraping, caulking, prying things open, opening paint cans, and this has held up very, very well. But and I love this knife. I love all of my pocket knives every knife I own, I love. So that's why, I know in the reviews it seems like, oh, they're always raving reviews. But I mean, I will tell you the things I don't like about the knives. But whenever I buy a knife, I always do a lot of research, watch videos, and if possible, handle the knife in a store to really get a good feel for it. And that's why I think it's tough whenever the thought comes up of having to maybe sell a knife or something, or just the hypothetical of it. A lot of channels I watch lately have been downsizing their knife collections, or just doing philosophy of, if I had to get rid of so many knives, if I could only keep 3 knives or 5 knives or whatever. The thought of that scares me. I don't like thinking about that. But it's because I love all my knives. But that's really not what this is about. I know I tend to ramble. But if I really was stuck with only one pocket knife, this would be the one. Just because it's very comfortable, it's extremely useful, it has really good edge retention. I really don't have issue putting a good edge on it, even with basic cheaper stones. 'Cause I know you'll hear that a lot too, like, oh, some of the steels, you need the high-end stones. You don't. I reprofiled this blade when I did the tip and broke it off, when I reprofiled it, and when I reprofiled the edge. I did it on an $8 Smith's double-sided sharpening stone that I bought at Walmart. You can sharpen knives as far as from what I've come across, you can sharpen just about any knife on any stone. You just need to be able to have the patience in order to do it. I mean, yes, this does take a while to sharpen on some of the more budget stones, if you will. But you know what? That's fine. That's not an issue for me at all. Not to say I wouldn't like one day to, get those $80, $100, $150 sharpening stones, the Japanese whetstones. Oh, it'd be great one day. But all in all, balls to the wall, this is the knife. I can't take any other pocket knife. This is the one I'm taking. And like I said, yeah, it's not my favorite pocket knife. It's one of. But this is the one that I really feel like I could stake my life on the most. Just, for the very minor cons, but all the pros that it offers, I think far outweigh any cons to it. I mean, alright, yeah, you know what? I have tons and tons of fix and wax. I would be bringing it with me. I can keep this coated. I mean, alright, it's a little bit of it's a harder steel, so it can be more brittle. But I mean, this thing dropped several feet and hit right on it. I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to find any knife that would fall, and the tip would be fully intact without, maybe it wouldn't snap off, but you'd have a lot of rounding. You're going to have to do work to fix that up anyway. Granted, yeah, this is more work. I had a squared off tip, but even still, there's enough blade length that if I snap it a couple more times, though it would be painful for me, I'm still going to have a good amount of knife left. So tell me what you guys think. If you got stuck and you could only take one pocket knife, which one would it be? Another point in time, I do want to do a fixed blade version of this video. If I could take one full fixed blade, which one would it be? That one's going to be a lot tougher to think about, though. That one I'm going to have to put some thought into. But let me know what you guys think. What would you think? Out of all these knives, which one would you take? Would you take this one? Would you take one of the other ones? Let me know why. I want to hear from you guys. I want to know what your thoughts are. But you guys have a great rest of your night. I hope I put some food for thought out there for you. I hope you got some good information out of this. And remember, guys, stay sharp. Keep carving. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and everything else. Yada, yada, yada. But have a great night, guys. Peace.